The world stood on the brink. The year was 1914. Europe, a continent of empires and ambition, was a powder keg waiting to explode. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo, ignited the fuse. This single event, fueled by a complex web of underlying tensions, plunged the world into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. The Great War, later known as World War I. For decades, Europe had been simmering with unresolved disputes and rivalries. Nationalism, the fervent belief in one's own nation's superiority, stoked tensions among the great powers. Imperialism, the drive for colonial expansion, pitted nations against each other in a scramble for resources and dominance. Meanwhile, militarism, the glorification of military strength, led to an arms race that left Europe armed and dangerous. These forces, nationalism, imperialism, and militarism, intertwined with a complex system of alliances, creating a volatile environment where a single spark could ignite a global conflagration. And ignite it did. The assassination in Sarajevo triggered a chain reaction as nations bound by treaties and fueled by fear and ambition declared war on one another. Within the weeks, Europe was engulfed in a conflict that would reshape the world forever. The world watched in disbelief as the lights of peace flickered and died. What began as a localized dispute in the Balkans quickly escalated into a global conflict, drawing in nations from across the globe. Millions of soldiers marched off to war, their heads filled with dreams of glory and a swift victory. They would soon discover the brutal reality of modern warfare. The alliance system in pre-war Europe was a complex and precarious web that ultimately contributed to the outbreak of World War I. These alliances, initially intended to maintain peace through a balance of power, instead created a climate of fear and suspicion. The Triple Alliance, formed in 1882, bound Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy together in a pact of mutual defense. This alliance, largely orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck of Germany, aimed to isolate France and prevent a two-front war for Germany. However, it also created a rigid structure that limited diplomatic options in times of crisis. In response to the Triple Alliance, France sought security by forming the Triple Entente with Russia and Great Britain. This alliance, solidified in the early 1900s, created a counterweight to German power and further divided Europe into two armed camps. The system of alliances, while seemingly designed to prevent war, paradoxically increased the likelihood of conflict. When Austria-Hungary, emboldened by German support, issued Serbia a harsh ultimatum following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the alliance system swung into action. Russia, bound by treaty to protect Serbia, began mobilizing its troops. Germany, obligated to defend Austria-Hungary, viewed Russian mobilization as an act of aggression and declared war on Russia. France, bound by its alliance with Russia, declared war on Germany. Within days, the great powers of Europe were at war, locked in a deadly embrace by the very alliances meant to prevent such a catastrophe. Nationalism, a powerful force in the early 20th century, played a significant role in the outbreak of World War I. It fostered a climate of competition and suspicion among the great powers, each believing in its own national superiority and destiny. This fervent nationalism manifested itself in various ways, from aggressive foreign policies to the romanticization of war. Imperialism, the drive for colonial expansion, further exacerbated tensions. European powers, competing for resources and markets, clashed in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. These imperial rivalries fueled resentment and distrust, creating a fertile ground for conflict. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of different ethnicities and nationalities, faced growing internal pressure from nationalist movements. Serbia, a Slavic nation, actively promoted the idea of a unified South Slav state, which threatened the territorial integrity of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist was a direct consequence of these simmering nationalistic tensions. The assassination provided Austria-Hungary with a pretext to crush Serbian nationalism and assert its dominance in the Balkans. However, Russia, itself a Slavic nation with ambitions in the region, was determined to protect Serbia. The clash between these two empires, fueled by nationalism and imperial ambitions, became the spark that ignited the First World War. In the years leading up to World War I, Europe had become a powder keg of militarism. The great powers, driven by a dangerous mix of nationalism, imperial rivalry, and fear, engaged in a reckless arms race. Military spending soared as nations expanded their armies and navies at an alarming rate. New and more deadly weapons were developed, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Germany, under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, sought to assert its dominance on the European continent. Its military build-up, particularly its expansion of its navy, alarmed Great Britain, which had long prided itself on its naval supremacy. The naval race between these two powers further fueled the arms race and heightened tensions. Military leaders and strategists rose to prominence, their voices often drowning out those of diplomats and peacemakers. War, once considered a last resort, was increasingly seen as an acceptable, even glorious means of achieving national goals. This militaristic mindset glorified aggression and minimized the potential consequences of war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand provided the spark, but it was the underlying militarism that made a wider European war almost inevitable. The armies, trained for war and eager to prove their might, were unleashed. The world watched in horror as the guns of August roared, signaling the start of a conflict that would claim millions of lives and leave an indelible scar on human history. Section 5. Blood and Mud. Major battles of the Great War. World War I was a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, characterized by its horrific battles and staggering loss of life. The Western Front, a 400-mile stretch of trenches that snaked across France and Belgium, became synonymous with the horrors of modern warfare. The Battle of the Marne, fought in September 1914, marked the end of Germany's hopes for a swift victory on the Western Front. The French and British armies, though badly outnumbered, successfully halted the German advance and prevented the fall of Paris. This early victory came at a terrible cost, with hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. The Battle of Verdun, fought between February and December 1916, became a symbol of the war's futility and brutality. German forces, seeking to bleed France white, launched a massive offensive against the fortress city of Verdun. The French, determined to hold their ground, fought with incredible tenacity. The battle raged for months, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. By the time the guns fell silent, over 700,000 men had been killed or wounded in the longest and one of the bloodiest battles in human history. The Battle of the Somme, launched by the British in July 1916, was intended to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun and achieve a breakthrough on the Western Front. However, the battle quickly descended into a bloody stalemate. On the first day of the offensive alone, the British Army suffered over 57,000 casualties, the worst single-day loss in British military history. The battle raged for months, with both sides suffering horrendous losses for minimal territorial gain. Section 6. Turning the tide key moments that shaped the outcome. Amidst the seemingly endless carnage of the Western Front, several key moments and events helped to shape the outcome of World War I. These turning points, often influenced by factors beyond the battlefield, ultimately shifted the balance of power and led to the eventual Allied victory. The entry of the United States into the war in April 1917 was a significant turning point. While the American Expeditionary Force did not immediately tip the scales in favor of the Allies, the arrival of fresh American troops and resources provided a much-needed morale boost and bolstered the Allied war effort. The Russian Revolution of 1917, which led to Russia's withdrawal from the war, had a profound impact on the conflict. The Bolsheviks, after seizing power, signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, freeing Germany from the Eastern Front and allowing it to concentrate its forces in the West. However, this move also freed up Allied troops that had been fighting in the East, ultimately benefiting the Allied cause. The final Allied offensives of 1918, spearheaded by a revitalized French army and a growing number of American troops, proved decisive. The German army, exhausted and demoralized after years of fighting, began to crumble. Faced with inevitable defeat, Germany signed the armistice on November 11, 1918, bringing an end to the fighting. Section 7. Scars of War: The Human Cost of Global Conflict. World War I exacted a devastating toll on human life, and left an indelible scar on an entire generation. Millions perished on the battlefields, victims of machine guns, artillery barrages, and poison gas. Countless others returned home physically maimed or psychologically shattered, forever haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. The war's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Civilians caught in the crossfire or subjected to brutal occupation endured unimaginable suffering. Food shortages, disease, and displacement became commonplace as the conflict dragged on. The war also had a profound impact on women. With millions of men away fighting, women took on new roles in factories, hospitals, and fields, challenging traditional gender roles and demonstrating their resilience and strength. The psychological scars of war ran deep. The unprecedented scale of death and destruction left an entire generation grappling with grief, loss, and disillusionment. The war shattered the illusion of progress and challenged traditional beliefs about humanity and civilization. Section 8. Technological Advancements, a Grim Evolution of Warfare. World War I witnessed an unprecedented evolution in military technology, forever changing the face of warfare. New weapons, from machine guns to tanks to poison gas, were unleashed on the battlefield, resulting in unprecedented levels of death and destruction. The machine gun, a weapon of terrifying efficiency, transformed the battlefield. Its ability to mow down advancing troops with devastating firepower led to the stalemate of trench warfare. The defensive advantage offered by the machine gun made it difficult for either side to achieve a breakthrough, resulting in years of bloody stalemate. Artillery, long a staple of warfare, reached new levels of destructive power. Massive artillery pieces capable of firing shells over vast distances rained down death and destruction on enemy trenches and cities. The constant bombardment created a landscape of craters, mud, and shattered bodies. Poison gas, a horrifying new weapon, was first used by the Germans in 1915. Chlorine gas, mustard gas, and other chemical weapons designed to inflict excruciating pain and death terrified and demoralized soldiers. The use of poison gas, a grim testament to the depths of human cruelty, violated international law and left a lasting legacy of horror. Section 9. A world reshaped, the enduring legacy of World War I. World War I, a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, profoundly reshaped the world, leaving an enduring legacy that continues to shape international relations, politics, and society today. The war led to the collapse of empires, redrew the map of Europe, and ushered in a new era of global instability. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires, once dominant forces, crumbled under the weight of war and internal strife. New nations emerged from the ashes of these empires, but their birth was often accompanied by violence and instability. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war but failed to address the underlying causes of the conflict. The treaty, widely viewed as punitive and unfair, imposed harsh reparations on Germany, sowed the seeds of resentment, and created conditions that contributed to the rise of extremism and the outbreak of World War II. The war also had a profound impact on the global balance of power. The United States, which emerged from the conflict as a major military and economic power, played an increasingly influential role on the world stage. The war also accelerated the decline of European dominance and set the stage for the rise of new global powers.